What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we've got a bit of an impromptu video, but anytime you have earth-shattering NFL news like the retirement of an elite NFL quarterback in his prime without any warning, it has to be addressed, as was the case of Andrew Luck late last night. And we're going to go ahead and look, obviously, at the fantasy football implications of all of this, the trickle-down effect it will have not only at the quarterback position, but also all other positions, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, how all of those Indianapolis Colts offensive players will be impacted, how you should project them, and potentially where you should draft them, if at all. Now, before getting into that, however, a quick reminder with so many fantasy football drafts right around the corner, if you haven't already, do yourself a favor, check out the description and get a copy of the 2019 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide. It's got individual player bios, overall player rankings, top 150 players, standard and PPR formats. It's got draft advice for snake drafts, for auction drafts, and more. So again, check out the description for that. Get yourself a copy now. But for now, let's go ahead and get right into it. So my initial reaction with Luck retiring was disbelief, shock, because honestly, I had Luck as an MVP candidate this season. He was my number 2 fantasy quarterback. And look, I realized that the ankle issue kind of came out of nowhere this last week, but I still thought even if he misses a game or two, he is still great value in later rounds. I absolutely loved his schedule as well. He had so many offensive weapons around him, probably one of the best offensive groups that he's had around him since the start of his career. So obviously, when you hear news of him retiring so early on, there's no other way to feel than just be shocked, be in disbelief. As far as fantasy wise, man, obviously Andrew Luck no longer on the list of quarterbacks to draft. But what does that mean? Is Jacoby Brissett, his backup and now the future starter in Indianapolis, a viable option? We've seen Brissett play before for the Indianapolis Colts, and the results have not been pretty. In my mind, he is a below average quarterback. Now, I will say the situation that he is in right now is a great one. He's got a great offensive line, he's got a lot of talent, and he's got a good defense. But your team in the NFL especially will only go as far as your quarterback can take you. And even though there's a lot of teams like, let's say, the Chicago Bears with a Mitch Trubisky, who's pretty much just a game manager, I don't think Jacoby Brissett is even that. To me, he's a backup quarterback, just like he was being used as while Andrew Luck was still on the Colts at best. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say Brissett shouldn't even be drafted in fantasy football drafts. If you are someone that already had your draft and took a chance on Andrew Luck, I don't even want to say took a chance because, again, we were all so high on him getting into the season, even with the injury, I would still say. Look, go ahead and look at some other free agent options, guys on the waiver wire, because no matter, maybe unless you're in a 2 quarterback league, that's when it's really going to be slim pickings. But there's probably guys like a Phillip Rivers or a Kirk Cousins or a Jimmy Garoppolo that still might be available. And I think that those are still some good options that you can go ahead and have decent production at the quarterback position week to week. So there you go, right from the start, some backup quarterback options you can look off of on waivers. If you really want one of those elite level quarterbacks, well, then you're probably going to have to go ahead and package one of a wide receiver or a running back, something like that, that's on your bench to try and trade for one. Now, I'm usually the person that says you don't need an elite quarterback like a Patrick Mahomes to draft one so early to be successful in fantasy football. You need to address other positions like running back and wide receiver that are more important early on. So again, that's why I'm saying I don't even think you need to hit that panic button that fast if you are in the camp of having Andrew Luck retired on you just within a couple of days. Now, more importantly, though, here, obviously we know with the quarterback position what this means. You're not going to have Luck available to you. You're going to have to go ahead potentially make a quarterback switch, and it limits the number of, as I would call them, tier 1 quarterbacks available. But let's look at what this does for the big playmakers that were being drafted early on by individuals on this Indianapolis offense, starting with T.Y. Hilton, the guy that was being drafted the highest. Look, even though I'm admittedly not the highest on T.Y. Hilton because I think he has issues with consistency, he gets nicked up from time to time, I still had him as a top 15 wide receiver purely because of the elite play of Andrew Luck and the connection, the chemistry those two guys have. But now you insert Jacoby Brissett in there, and man, I think there is a huge fall off with T.Y. Hilton. Because, like I said, look, I had him as a right around 13th, 14th, 15th overall wide receiver, just giving you a little bit of a range. Now, in my standard rankings, I have him right outside the top 25, right around there behind a guy like a Tyler Lockett or Chris Godwin, honestly, because those guys still have their immediate play callers throwing them the football. I think T.Y. Hilton becomes a huge risk right now. And in PPR formats, I have him dropping off even more. I have him right around the 27th, the 28th mark for wide receivers. You might call this a huge, not warranted drop off. But again, you're only going to go as far in the NFL and especially fantasy as your quarterback will take you. And trust me here, folks, Jacoby Brissett is not a good quarterback. He unfortunately just isn't. So to me, T.Y. Hilton right now, along with really any other wide receivers that you were considering on the Indianapolis Colts, become guys that you should avoid. Now, at some point, you do go ahead and look at value, and I think T.Y. Hilton is going to have a huge drop-off in ADP. He was going probably somewhere in the mid-third round. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if he's still there in the fifth round, something like that. I had him as a tier 3 wide receiver before. Now he's on the bottom level of like tier 4 wide receivers. I think he becomes a wide receiver 2 at this point in time. And you really have to go ahead and deduct expectations in terms of yardage, in terms of catches, in terms of touchdowns. That's why you have the drop off there. Same thing with a guy like a Devin Funchess. You know, he was always going to be touchdown dependent, but now you have to go ahead and expect regression in terms of yardage projections, also in terms of touchdowns as well, because I think probably the Indianapolis Colts are going to focus more than anything on their run, and especially if Brissett struggles early on. Let's go ahead and address the tight ends real fast, however, here before we switch to the running backs, because they still fall in this pass catching category. Now, I'm going to go ahead and go on record and say that I was never a big fan of Eric Ebron for this 2019 season. He was one of my prime candidates to go ahead and have a regression. He was on my do not draft list even before these Andrew Luck news came out. But now I had him as a right around borderline top 10 tight end just because, again, of the touchdown potential, his usage in the red zone, which, again, I think it'll decline because of a healthy Jack Doyle, because of Devin Funchess. Now I've got him as right around my 15th overall tight end in standard formats. In PPR formats, 17th overall. So huge drop off. And then Jack Doyle, I've got him 18th overall now in both formats. I was pinpointing Jack Doyle as a guy that you could potentially get a sleeper pick on. I thought he fit better with the type of play Andrew Luck had. I thought he was a better possession tight end than Eric Ebron. But again, pretty much at this point in time, that's all a moot point because both these guys are going to be so dependent on their quarterback. And Jacoby Brissett, I hate to keep bringing this up, but he is not a good quarterback. He is a below average quarterback. You wake me up from a deep sleep, I can name you 16 better quarterbacks, if not more, easily in a second. So for that reason, I'm not high on any of these pass catchers at this point in time in Indianapolis. But let's go touch on Marlon Mack, because quite possibly he might be the most intriguing guy here because, look, albeit Andrew Luck, obviously elite level passer of the football, but the rushing attack a little bit separate, and the Indianapolis Colts still have that great offensive line intact. Now, I will say Marlon Mack, again, a guy that I wasn't really that high on to begin with because we've seen him get nicked up. I think he still isn't quite as good of a pass catcher as I would like to see, especially in PPR formats. And for that reason, I had him right around the 20 mark for standard and PPR formats. Now I've dropped him in standard formats to my 25th overall running back. In PPR formats, I've dropped him to 27th overall, behind guys like Josh Jacobs, behind guys like Sony Michel, because again, I think this offense for the Colts becomes kind of one-dimensional with Brissett under center. I think he still has a lot of growing to do as an accurate passer of the football. Now, the problem is the Colts right now, they just have so much talent that they're kind of in quarterback hell if you're just talking about the NFL team as a whole. So I think it's going to be a while until they get really a great quarterback in there to make some of those options viable, especially speaking fantasy wise. Marlon Mack right now becomes a low end running back 2 in my eyes. I think, he's still a starter. He's still obviously the projected starter for the Indianapolis Colts, which is obviously valuable in fantasy. Anytime you have a starting running back in a situation with a good offensive line, you have to go ahead and give him credit. But I've gone ahead and I have reduced his projections in terms of rushing yards, in terms of touchdowns. So to me right now, again, he becomes a risky low end running back 2 that I think it's going to be a situation maybe somewhat similar to what the Baltimore Ravens have. They become one-dimensional. The Ravens are a run-first team, and opposing defenses are going to stack the box and force the Indianapolis Colts now to beat them through the air. And I don't think Brissett is going to be able to do that consistently game in and game out. So even though I think Marlon Mack probably is the player that I'd be most likely to take a chance on in this Indianapolis offense at this point in time, I'm still putting him on my do not draft list. And that is honestly my biggest takeaway at this point in time for all of these Indianapolis offensive players. Do yourself a favor. Even though at the start of the season, I had the Indianapolis Colts as one of the top fantasy offenses, obviously prior to this Andrew Luck injury. Now, or I should say retirement, now with this news about Luck retiring, they are one of my offenses to avoid. I'm not going to be drafting anyone on the Indianapolis Colts. There's too many question marks. We still don't know what Brissett is going to be. We don't know what this offense is going to be capable of without Andrew Luck. We've seen how good they are without Andrew Luck before when he was hurt, and it wasn't that good. They become significantly worse without Andrew Luck. So my biggest takeaway, do yourself a favor, avoid the Indianapolis Colts offense. Obviously, at some point in time, there's going to be incredible value. If you're really feeling up for it, go ahead. I guess I would take a chance on it, but to me, that's a risk that's not worth taking. The risks that I tend to take are on guys that are in great offensive situations, which, like we've gone ahead and covered, this is not one of them. If you're someone that drafted Andrew Luck, again, to recap, go ahead, check out the waiver wire. Look at guys like a Kirk Cousins, Jimmy Garoppolo, Phillip Rivers, all decent options. Don't overpay. Don't panic and overpay for a high-end quarterback. You will be okay. But other than that, let me hear it in the comments section because we kind of go ahead and wrap it up from here. What are you thinking now with this news coming out about Andrew Luck? Are you going to be avoiding certain guys on that offense? Are you excited about potential value you can get on them? Or has everyone pretty much gone on your do not draft list? Let me hear it in the comments section along with any other fantasy questions you guys might have because obviously these fantasy football drafts right around the corner. And as always, if you enjoyed, make sure to like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in future videos.